And so I'd like to formally introduce Professor Richard Franklin from James Cook University and Susan Teerds from Kidsafe. Welcome to you both.
Good morning, thank you.
Good afternoon,
Good morning,
Justin.
Susan. Good afternoon, good morning. Great to see you, Susan. Can you just tell us all a little bit about yourself and what you love doing?
So I'm the CEO of Kidsafe Queensland. I'm representing Kidsafe nationally because Kidsafe as an organisation has been around over 40 years, and it's good to see the number of drownings in this age group has gone down. I'm also the grandmother of 3 boys. They're now 8, 10 and 12, and they're all still having swimming lessons, I might say, but at quite a cost, which I think is a barrier, but I'm sure we'll get into that later. So I'm pretty passionate about allowing children to grow healthy, happy, and be inquisitive and explore their surroundings, and to encourage all of us grown-ups to make their environment as safe as we can for them to all be little Indiana Joneses.
That's a great introduction, Susan. Thank you. Let's go to Richard. How about what's keeping you busy at the moment, Rich?
Well, Wadamuli, Justin, and that's welcome from the Bindagubba people here in Townsville, and just recognise the traditional owners also of the lands on which I'm meeting. So I guess, great to have this session, and it's good to see a really strong focus on the rural and remote populations, and thinking through, I think, some of the real challenges for us around locations and people when we start to look at it across Australia. We know that if you go more remotely, we see the numbers go up, and obviously it's a real challenge for us to think about. You talked before about kind of collaboration, which we're going to need very much for a rural area, but it's also about capacity and thinking about how do we kind of deliver that. And we've got lots of strategies, but what we don't know is how do you make them work in a rural and remote setting? How do we make sure that these strategies are effective? Swimming lessons are great, but how do we make sure that we get them out there? How do we make sure that people are well trained and they're well delivered as part of the kind of that approach? And you know as well, I do a lot of work around farm safety, and we're talking about children drowning in dams and trying to keep them safe in that sort of space. And just generally, as you talked about before, having fun and enjoying kind of the water without obviously then getting into trouble. And similar to Susan, I've got 3 boys, so twin boys that are 5 and an 8-year-old. And, we've just got back from the beach up at Magnetic Island, and thinking about, when we talk about rural, we often think about rivers and we think about dams and we think about lakes, but we also are talking about, remote beaches and remote locations like estuaries and other places where people do get in a bit of trouble, and going out kayaking, canoeing, and all the different sort of activities, from water skiing as well. So really complex environments as well, which I think is, we need to talk about and think about a little bit more, which is, we've tried to pull out a little bit from the plan, but I think this is the things that we grapple with. And you look at some of the lakes that we see that are close to towns, their water supplies, they're being used for water skiing, they're being used for swimming in, they're being used for fishing, they're being used for all these range of great activities to get people out there. And it does create that kind of challenge for us. And I think the population numbers are tough as well, because we do find less people, even though the rates go up, there are less people out there. So how do we work through those sort of challenges as well is really great. So great to see this on, great to see the plan. Nice to see that it was launched in front of a small number of people, COVID safe. But it's great, I think, that we're talking about this. And I'm again just reflecting on where we've come from, and you and I have been somewhat on this journey together over a number of years. But the original stuff that we kind of put together, saying we think we need to do this, moving much more towards an evidence base. And I'm just really excited about the number of different research projects that are out there, and people really looking at and challenging what we do and don't know around drowning in Australia.
Yeah, look, I think that's a really good place to start, Richard. Certainly the first Australian Water Safety Plan was created in 1998 and launched in Canberra. And there was a piece of research in the MJA by a good friend and colleague, the late Dr. Ian Mackey. He was the medical advisor for Royal Lifesaving and Surf Lifesaving simultaneously. So that was a good example of collaboration and leadership. And he was one of the people that brought early science to the life-saving community. But if I reflect on the journey of the water safety strategy, it really very much has been about focusing on children. So let's start the conversation, Richard and Susan, with children. and just reflect perhaps on the achievements that have been made and perhaps some of the drivers for those achievements in reducing child drowning under 5. I'm a bit loose with my numbers sometimes, so I think in front of the parliamentarians I got the numbers quite wrong, but it is upwards of 58%, 68%, I think, during the duration of the last strategy that child drowning was reduced. So let's talk about why and how that came about, and then we'll get to the what we need to do next. So Susan, can I start with you, child drowning?
I think that really one of the key factors in reducing child drowning was the pool fencing legislation. So if this is where children are drowning most, and I do recall in Brisbane, I've been told the story by Professor John Pern, that about one a week we would hoik a kid out of a pool in the Brisbane area, and that's the way it was. So I think that the acknowledgement of the dangers of pools and the kids fall in and they're attracted to water, and then the ensuing legislation really made a big difference.
Yeah. So Richard, you've had a look at legislation at some point. What's your view on legislation and what we might need to do next on that?
Well, I think, we've actually had a very good space, I think, with the legislation. We started off with pretty patchy, at a local government area, very different between even abutting local government areas had different requirements around pool fencing and what was required. We've now got state-based legislation, which I think is a significant improvement. Most of it's about foresighted, so we recognise that it wasn't initially, we thought it's children coming into the yard and drowning, but it's not that. It's really kids that live in the home. It's proximity to water that's a big challenge there. So most of them gone to foresighted. We had a few, I guess, wins and a few losses around the pool fencing stuff. 1.2 metres is a reasonable height, but probably with the work that was done early on by Jim Nixon and John Pern, it should have probably been more like 1.4. It was a bit of a trade-off, and I think that a compromise, but I think we've also recognised about climbing around the pool area and the fences to allow children to get in, and also the maintenance stuff. So the big challenge, I think, is to continue making sure that the pool fences are working in good working order. That means the gates are still self-closing, self-latching, no holes, no damage to the fence. That's been a major problem for us throughout Queensland with the disasters that we've had over the last couple of years, with bits of fence being washed out, and then you kind of go, oh, well, there's lots of water around, but when that goes, the fence is still damaged. And so, again, good legislation here in Queensland, and some of it's been replicated elsewhere about rentals as well, making sure that when you go in, so there is that key period as people move into properties that are high risk for children drowning. So I think all of those things have been really good around the legislation. I think still some enforcement issues and some follow-up around that needs to be kind of looked at as part of that. Still a little bit of awareness stuff. So again, some really good stuff that was done early on, making people aware of the pool fencing and the sort of the need for it as well. But a very effective strategy on the whole to kind of reduce it down when it's in place and working. And what we tend to see now is, the pool fence has been compromised, either been held open by somebody, not in good working order, or unfortunately, sometimes the children are left in the pool area, not supervised as part of that sort of challenge. So I think the legislation is good. Little tweaks, I think, is what's needed, but really enforcement is, I think, the big challenge for us next. And how do you do that in a way that's cost effective?
Right. So Susan, let's talk about supervision and what we need to do with our messaging around supervision.
Unfortunately, people don't understand the word supervise and what it actually means. And we know that with young children, supervision means eyes on and within arm's reach. But everybody has their own idea of what supervision means, unfortunately. And a lot of parents do also think that now they've taken their baby and their toddler to swimming lessons, that they've been drown-proofed. So we still have a lot of work to do just on the supervision angle, and the idea that swimming lessons do not drown-proof your children. I mean, I do know of friends of my grandsons who have just fallen into the pool and forgotten how to swim at the age of 7. They've had swimming lessons, they do know how to stay afloat. So, and the parents, at what age do you think your children are safe in the pool and around water? And while the pool is the biggest body of water in most people's home environments, there are a lot of other bodies of water that we cannot forget. And, there's fish ponds and there's dog water bowls, there's buckets for soaking, and then puddles after rain. And all of those require close supervision.
Thank you. There's a few questions in the chat just about the importance of the messaging around child drowning and pushing legislation, but also reminding people about complacency and supervision. And what I thought we'd do now is just have a look at some of the campaigns. There's a number of organisations that campaign in this space. So let's just have a look at a couple of the more recent TV commercials that have been developed.
Kids can't help themselves around water. You need to. Keep watch.
Simply open the pull or spar gate, let it go to check that it self-closes. To test that it self-latches, simply pull on the gate to see if it can be opened. If it doesn't self-close or self-latch, then the gate or the latch may need some maintenance or repair.
Listen up, Australia. This message saves lives.
Principal, shut the gate, teach your kids to swim, it's great. Supervise, what you make, and learn how to resuscitate, and learn how.
Visit us online and we'll teach you about water safety. Kids Alive, do the 5.
Thanks, Laurie. Laurie's been a great campaigner. I do apologise for the earworm because often I see that TV commercial and it's hard to get the song out of your head, which I guess is the point of communications. Richard, everyone's taking a slightly different angle at this. And one of the things in the water safety strategy that has been highlighted is the need to find a way to standardise the message and make sure that they are evidence informed. Have you got any thoughts on how the sector, as a consequence of this strategy, might try and adjust these messages or ensure that they get to the right audiences at the right time?
I think there's two parts of that, Justin. I think we're actually a lot closer with the same messages than we were, a decade ago. I think, mostly we're talking about effective supervision, as Susan was talking about before, about being within arm's reach, all of your attention, all of your time, slightly different ways that we kind of do that. We're all about fencing the pool, a little bit of if something does go wrong, learn resuscitation. Is really critical as part of that process. So I think we are pretty close around the messaging. I actually think that that's a good thing. And I think then the question is, how do we get to other groups? And I think we do have some challenges with those where English is not the first language. I think the other big challenge for us now is that lots of people are no longer watching television and seeing these ads. And I mean, unless you're like me, a bit of an insomniac and you're up at 11 o'clock at night where they play all the community service announcements, people just aren't seeing it, and I know with my kids, it's Netflix and it's YouTube. And so the question is, what's the new marketing going to be about how do we get these messages out and how do we link into parents around those teachable moments? I mean, and that's part of the challenge for us. So again, when people go to buy a house or when people are getting children, what's the most important time to get to them? And we know from some previous research that it's probably not prior to having the kid. It's probably sometime just afterwards that's really key, but not straight away, because as a new parent, you're kind of thinking, how do I hang on to this kid without dropping it? How do I feed? Trying to stay awake to do all the feeding kind of issues around it. So I think that's one of the challenges for us over the next couple of years, is to think about that really key teachable moment where we can get in to parents. Mum and bub groups help seed the idea, but it's then when they're out, and it's also when kids start moving around. So it's really that, that 18 months when they start to move from crawling to walking and getting around, to think about how do we get the message at that stage about key things around this issue. And obviously swimming lessons are an important part of that, particularly as they get a bit older. We want to make sure that kids have that foundation skills. So again, I think we've got the messages and we're more or less on target, probably a little bit of tweaking for some similarities, but I also think there's some strength in having slightly different ways that people approach it, so that people are getting the same message, but in a different way from a different audience, from a nice catchy jingle, from a, hey, this is different types of children, from, oh, this is a kid talking to you, from here's a celebrity. I think all of these things add to the volume, and that's really important when we're trying to get the message out there.
Great, thanks, Richard. And you did a good job of answering one of the questions that's floating through the question and answer in the Zoom chat at the moment. So keep those coming if you're in the audience. If you've got a question, use the question and answer section or function, or you can put it in the chat and we'll do our best to stay on top of things. Susan, one final question for you. You mentioned earlier, I think that was about adults and adults being aware of the environments in which they're putting children into. Can you talk just a little bit about the non-pool issue? So child drowning prevention in areas other than swimming pools.
There's a lot of bodies of water, and Richard touched on it before. On farms, for instance, there's troughs, but there's also dog bowls in the domestic environment. There's buckets that we might soak clothes in, or the kids are playing in. And even a lot of childcare centres, we have nature play, and we have water that potentially doesn't drain properly out of their playgrounds. And I think it's easy to, there's a lot of work being done on safety in a pool and about the fences and the gates and, you know, getting swimming lessons and everything. But there's a lot less being talked about actual other bodies of water. And of course, children are attracted to water. Children of all ages are attracted to water, and muddy water, you can't see the bottom. We've got a lot of other issues about other bodies of water that need to be addressed. You know, on farms, on properties, swimming, learning to swim in a pool is great when you're in a pool and you're in that water. It does not equip you to swim in a dam or a creek, anything fast flowing, or the surf. So, you know, a lot of parents still have this belief they've learned to swim in a pool so they can happily swim in this dam with the friends' kids, or they can go to the surf and they'll be fine there. There's still a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you. I know there's lots of learn to swim people nodding their heads, and certainly that notion of broader open water experiences and education in non-pool environments has been reinforced in several areas of the strategy, including in the swim schools section. Susan, listen, the other thing I was thinking was actually the NT Water Safety Task Force Drains campaign in Darwin. I know they had a few very tragic episodes in Darwin, and sometimes people in Sydney, kind of in Melbourne, we kind of forget the tropics and the consequences of the wet season in the tropics. So I think that's an important area as well that I know the NT Water Safety Task Force will be continuing to focus on. Susan, thank you very much. We might move on and talk about young people in just a second, but I do appreciate your time this morning. We might move you into the crowd, and we might come back if we need a little bit more perspectives on Kidsafe a little bit later on.